Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for today's Comics Creator Chat. Joining me today is my globe-trotting friend, John Harris Dunning. John was on in October as a part of our Dark Horse Comics Halloween movie recommendation show, telling me a little bit about his new horror project, Ripperland, co-written by Steve Orlando, and I wanted to know more, so he's back on to discuss it. John, where are you now? I never know if you're hiding out in Greece or back in the UK.
I'm back in the UK now.
Good. Well, I'll speak for myself that I didn't get through half of the movies I wanted to for spooky season, but I did manage to catch a few good things.
Yeah.
Your recommendation, Saint Maud, is on my watch list when I get a little more time.
Right.
Did you happen to find anything that you found particularly memorable that you got a chance to watch?
No, actually, it's been quite a busy time in terms of just conventions and stuff. Obviously, did New York, and then there's another big one here called Thought Bubble in the UK. So I just feel, and then also trying to get some pictures out. I feel like I've actually been working quite quickly, quite hard just to get things out this side of Christmas, and hoping to be able to down tools soon and just get to the serious business of eating too much and opening presents.
Well, did you make some good connections and at least enjoy the cons and stuff?
So much, absolutely incredible. You always discover new material, and it's just really nice to spend some time with fellow creators and journalists and lovers of comics and readers, and it always really jazzes you up, seriously. But I think we said this the last time we got together. There's an awful lot, maybe not to be too optimistic about in the world right now, but feels like comics are really exciting. There's just so much. I kind of can't really read everything I want to read at the moment. So just in terms of contemporary comics, and I've definitely been through phases where I'm reading, comics from the past only, but it just feels like things are spiking right now, and there's just so many amazing creators working. So it's a good place to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm pretty hype about things. I mean, obviously, we don't quite know yet how the production and supply chain stuff will work with the potential tariff stuff, but I mean, hopefully it's not too bad.
Yeah. Yes, hoping.
Yeah. Well, I'll put the link for the horror movie recommendation show in the show notes for anyone going back interested in listening to that.
Yeah, there was
a lot of
great
fun.
ideas. I mean, it was absolutely fascinating to hear everybody's ideas. It's a really nice cheat sheet, actually. There were very cool recommendations.
Yeah. I got to a few things. I finally got to Bone Tomahawk,
Right.
which I don't know if you've seen it, but that was pretty intense. It ramped up to that point, and then wow. So
Yeah. Okay, I'll up that on my list. Then it's on my list. I haven't seen it yet, but I'll bring it out for a bit of shock horror.
Nice. Well, moving on to Ripperland, I read issue 1 that you sent over. So let me set the stage. This is a return to Victorian England in a sort of very unlikely way. It's 2188. A post-Brexit England finds itself vulnerable as the rest of the UK rejoins the European Union. Who do they seek to help them out at this most vulnerable time? The colonists, of course. So America. In exchange for financial and militaristic protections, England becomes a big Victorian theme park for the American tourists, and it is indeed a true return. There's no modern technological conveniences. And so when a randy American tech mogul grandson is killed, an American detective, Agent Holden, is sent over to investigate with his English counterpart, Detective Edwin Fogg. All right, so I think that sets things pretty well.
Yeah, I mean,
All right, so let's...
yeah,
Go ahead.
it's interesting, like how one would explain the sort of Victorianness of the space, and I think you put it really well in that it's. I guess the crucial thing is the UK goes to the US and says how's about our special relationship, which is such a tragic thing, which the English keep saying, but like nobody in America knows there is a special relationship, but everyone in England thinks there is one. So it comes down to this crucial moment in the series where the UK says to the US, "Can you help us? We don't have military capacity or any industrial capacity since post Brexit. We've given up our ability to earn money." And America says, "We've got nothing to offer us except history. So if you become a theme park for us, then that's great." So it's sort of joking for now. Let's see what happens in the next couple of years. But it's playing on these ideas, and I guess in terms of the world building, what this means is that it's been over a century of British people living like this. So as you say, this is no longer like a kind of cosplay enactment. People have lived now for generations without any technology, in a truly Victorian fashion. So, they believe it completely that they're in the I mean, they know that the outside world is different, but that's their reality. So they're sort of truly living in a Victorian space. And I think that's how me and Steve wanted it to feel, that they're not just acting. They believe their experience is of living in a Victorian period, even though it's in the future.
Well, how did you and Steve cook this up exactly?
Well, we got chatting. We hadn't met in person actually yet, but we got chatting online. It was just before I went over to New York a couple of years ago, and then we hung out and we met properly, and we sort of progressed it. But we just started off with a little Zoom call because I really admired him, and I reached out to him and we chatted, and he just threw the gauntlet down in the first conversation, saying it would be so cool if we collaborated on something. And his idea was to set it in the UK and do something sort of British flavored, because he's a big Anglophile. So he sort of threw the gauntlet down and was just like, let's do something in the UK. And I thought about it a little bit, and we were both talking about the various political issues in both of our countries and how we felt about it and stuff. And it just felt like this story would allow us to explore that a little bit and I was going to say be critical, but it's not actually being critical of our countries. It's critiquing our countries, which I think is a different thing, which is just sort of exploring what are the perceptions that can be dangerous to us, both in terms of sort of British arrogance and American arrogance, and what are these cultural tropes that we're living by, and how useful are those or how unuseful are those. So that's the sort of very highbrow concept at the root of this, but hopefully it's a bit of fun as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a lot of fun. And of course you have the overlay of Ripperland. So we obviously have Jack the Ripper echoes there. So what interests you personally about the Jack the Ripper story that you kind of wanted to put that in there?
Well, he's one of the sort of foundational myths, he's very important, I think, to British culture. A few things. One is that, one could sort of argue that he is the same as the serial killer became in America in the 80s and 90s, this idea of it's like the ultimate urban man. In other words, a creature that is created by the cities, for the cities, and can only operate in that kind of world in a way. I think that's what I felt about Jack the Ripper. This is a man that could only be spawned post the Industrial Revolution, where you had these huge amounts of people who were displaced, not in their family units, living in terrible squalor, drifting. So nobody's got any roots down. It feels like that is a sort of nightmarish view of urban living, which was also true. And there's always that element of urban living as a utopianism, but this is the sort of nightmare aspect. And so I think it's sort of almost like a foundation for modernity. And it's sort of looking at that. So I think that's quite interesting. I think the other sort of maybe kind of satirical, humorous thing, if one can say that about Jack the Ripper, was just, I think in many ways the UK is an American colony already. And, culturally, as an artist, one has to appeal to an American audience or you can't make a living really. England isn't big enough anymore. So we depend on American products. So writing a story from England, you kind of have to make it presentable for an American audience. You need to put on a bonnet. You need to make it like Sherlock Holmes. You need to sort of British it up a bit, sort of, a bit of sort of Jim Crow performance. Do a bit of whiteface. And so basically, Jack the Ripper was that. And it was a kind of playful way of us being like, okay, well, I mean, what's more British than Jack the Ripper, and the Victorian period?
Sure.
So being a little bit playful with that as well.
Okay. Well, I went back and did a little background research myself on the Ripper case.
God, who is he?
The chief inspector.
Who is he, Bauer?
Oh, yeah. So the chief I did. Yeah, the chief inspector in charge was one Frederick Aberling. And interesting bit of background here, he was assigned to the case as an investigator because he had previously been a beat cop in the area. So his subsequent case to the Ripper was the Cleveland Street scandal. Now, this was allegedly where his superiors covered up that the Duke of Clarence, or Queen Victoria's grandson, along with other aristocrats, were discovered frequenting a male brothel. So given the predilections of Kenny Fitzpatrick, the tech mogul's grandson, in the story, I'm curious, because there seems like a mixing of history here from where I'm sitting.
There's definitely that.
So,
and I'm really pleased you spotted that, Byron, because look, the thing is, you get total Jack the Ripper nuts. I mean, the most incredible, like people who've done the most incredible research and deep dives, and it is extraordinary. So I felt it was one of those things as well. It's like you pitch the idea and then you have to write it, and you're like, because you could literally spend 10 years researching this thing and not even scratch the surface. So what I tried to do was I read around quite a lot. I mean, I knew quite a lot, but I mean, I'm not like a major Jack the Ripper authority. So I read as much as I could. And then what I tried to do is, I cannot pretend to be comprehensive in my knowledge, but what I try to do is give little cookies in the story. And there are a number of things that I think if people are really serious Jack the Ripper nuts, they'll be able to find a few things where there are resonances that they realize I'm giving them a little bit of a wink. Including something like that, where yes, I'd read that and it was really interesting actually, and that was quite crucial to the investigation, and also it's crucial to how we read that investigation now, because it was obviously like there were certain people that a finger could never be pointed at. So if it was ever going to be pointed at them, then they would be able to get away, which is a possibility that might have happened. Because there's another really good book called Everybody Loves Jack, which is a giant tome on Jack the Ripper, and that also looks at the fact that really, if it was somebody noble or kind of high up in the social sort of hierarchy of England at the time, they simply could not have been arrested or accused, because it would have been too dangerous socially to believe that anybody highborn could do something like that. So it's interesting to look at that, and I think we've got some resonances of that in the story. I mean, in our story, there's something quite, it's not a plot spoiler or anything, but it's like there's something quite performative about this murder. This murder's done for a reason, and the personal peoples who enact this murder are very aware of the history of this murder. So that opens up another whole sort of layer of sort of meta reflection on the killings.
Yeah, it's an interesting lens to look at modern privilege as well. You have the association with historical aristocratic parallels there.
That's right. And who are those hierarchies now? As you say, how would you identify them? And for me, it's a sort of the Fitzpatricks, were the sort of like Murdoch kind of family who are very, very powerful and very, very able to control the media and narratives, across the media internationally, and how does that play out?
Yeah, serial killers are fascinating to me because they hold a mysticism, and we almost elevate them. Maybe elevate's not the right word, but we have ours in America. There's Dahmer and et cetera. You have Jack the Ripper in Britain, and I've always wondered why we do that. We put them on a pedestal a little bit.
So I would say that Jack the Ripper, I would say more as like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, because Jack the Ripper doesn't necessarily exist, And when I say that, I mean, if you really, really dig down into the murders, it may not have even been the same person doing these murders. And certainly the letters that were being sent to the newspapers are almost like 90% were from a journalist creating the story of Jack the Ripper and trying to produce this character to sell papers and create a story. So the fact that there was such an incredible response to this character, I think is in a direct lineage to why there was this obsession with serial killers in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s in America. And I would argue that it's something quite psychological, it's quite Jungian, it's something to do with this sort of shadow side of humanity and our dark side, but kind of invulnerable. I mean, these are characters who are not afraid of anything. They're impervious, they're impermeable, and they're completely like, you're saying, why do we almost worship them in some ways? It's like there's, I guess what's attractive about them, if one could say that, is that, they are completely, I was going to say enslaved, but they're completely in tune with their impulses, however monstrous those are. And I think, that is something that we don't, feel necessarily. We're trying to control those. We're trying to understand our dark side, whereas they're not having that struggle. They're submitting to that and just getting on with it, which is interesting.
Yeah, I've never quite thought about it that way, but it does encapsulate in ways the American idea of freedom.
Yeah, exactly. And and also they are, and that's another bigger story. They're monsters, and monsters have always got this kind of weird attraction, and on the one hand you're attracted to them and they're fascinating by how brutal they are and how scary they are. On the other hand, they're sort of, they're hideous and you're terrified. And it's a way of exploring all of those things, maybe in a more mythological way. But it's interesting because obviously Jack the Ripper, those murders happened, but Jack the Ripper is a mythological confection, I would say. Certainly the way he's come to be presented and how we understand him now.
And you've kind of laid it out. Jack doesn't exist without the environment, without London. And you described it in the book as kind of a theater of crime, and that the architecture provides the perfect stage. I've been to London a few fair times myself, but as a tourist, that's an interesting illustration. And granted, I was not exploring the sex trade, but there's like a Shakespearean echo, if you will, to kind of the way you lay that out. All the world's a stage.
Yeah,
okay,
totally.
so. And London is this notoriously heavily surveilled place. So is crime a current problem, or did you kind of have to take it back to Victorian England to do that?
It really isn't. It's incredibly safe. I'm always sort of quite amazed, actually, when Americans come to the UK, how, I'm from South Africa originally, and I also had this thing where I took that post-traumatic stress disorder of living in a country with guns, expecting that level of violence all the time. It just doesn't exist in the UK. It's not like there's no crime, but if you walk home at night, the chances of being attacked is absolutely minimal. And if you are attacked, it's some crazy jumping out at you. If they have a knife, it'd be a miracle, but they never would have a gun or something. So it's very, very rare. So I did have to go back to this idea of the Victorian period, where it really was, pretty brutal and pretty terrifying, and really, if you were on the streets and you were at a certain level, nobody cared anyway what happened to you. So if you lived or died, it didn't, and whether you were a child or an adult, nobody really cared. So it was also interesting to sort of think about, what would it be going back into such a place, because societies do slide, and I think that's something that's important, because I think, there's this idea in the West, like, particularly in arrogant countries like America and England, that, it will always go forward, and there's an expectation everything will always improve, because they haven't really been through that, like, collapse like many countries have. Like, even countries like Spain and Portugal, who are, some of the richest countries in the world, who then had these collapses and they've come back from them very successfully. But it's just like, they've had decades, in some cases, maybe sort of a century of really, poverty and social upheaval that I don't think we've really seen yet, but, might be about to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see. It's fascinating to me, because from the outside perspective, sort of looking in over there, Americans maintain this very idyllic perception of things, right? So despite being founded in 1776, with now hundreds of years of our own history, admittedly, there's certain charm, right, of older cultures. And everyone wants to go visit somewhere with cobblestone streets and a quaint historic appeal, and until they have to walk several miles on those cobblestone streets, or they're in lodging without a private bath and no king-size bed, right? And it's funny, because I've had different family members who had those experiences this past summer when visiting Italy and Sweden. So there's a bit of a, I don't know if you've seen the TV show, but there was a bit of a death in paradise feel without the beautiful
Yeah.
island
Oh,
going on here.
absolutely, absolutely. And look, the grass is always greener, and there's always
Right.
there's kind of balance. But I guess that's a really, really good segue back to Ripperland, which is basically what Steve and I were both doing at the beginning of this. Steve Orlando, who, I've co-written this with, who's just been an incredible collaborator. We could not have had more fun. It was really about that. It was like, what are our perceptions of our own countries? What do other people perceive? How do we critique and criticize them, as people living there? What do we think about the other person's society? How can we wind them up? So that was really fun. And we played that out between our two lead characters, who's this kind of FBI agent, Jesse Holden, who comes over with a bit of swagger. And, he's from the future, in inverted commas, in terms of, he's got technology, he's got all these things. And he's forced to team up with this basically Victorian detective, who's Detective Edward Fogg, who doesn't, he's never seen a mobile phone, and that ends up forensics.
Yes.
And it's just absolutely ludicrous to Jesse initially. And then how these two come to respect each other and come to see, the positives and the negatives of each other and each other's backgrounds. And I think that's really important, is to reintroduce this concept of nuance. It's not about like, America's terrible and England's amazing, or England's terrible and America's. It's like, actually, these are all very complicated situations, and we can learn things from each other. And that's what the conversation should really be about.
Are Fogg and Holden as characters going to, as we move through, because to some extent they do in issue 1, but are they sort of the embodiment of their countries?
Well, you shall see. I mean, this is a really good. I mean, is yeah. I mean, I don't even want to say the names, but
no, that's fine.
You could argue like, who is an embodiment of America right now, and who is not an embodiment of America right now. It's like they are embodiments of their country, but that doesn't mean they are not critical of their countries, or that they don't feel like outsiders, or that, so it becomes complicated basically. But yes, we definitely use them as mouthpieces, as, two men who are living in, America and England, and we use them as quite playful, satirical mouthpieces.
Did you and Steve ever consider inverting sort of the roles of the countries here? And
well, in terms of who was writing what, or inverting how?
In terms of, well, what if America had become the UK's playground, for instance?
Yeah, I didn't want to give England that, because I was so pissed off with it post-Brexit, that I wanted to look at catastrophic. So I think both of us actually were coming with quite a lot of good. It's a good question. We both coming with a lot of righteous anger, that we wanted the therapy of being able to sort of say. So I definitely was not going to be giving England the ability to be like, this had worked, and that something had actually had come of it. And I think, I think for Steve, it was interesting to explore this sort of high-handedness sometimes of the US, and the sort of colonial leanings, without really acknowledging what those are necessarily. There can be something quite disingenuous sometimes about America's helpfulness in the rest of the world, which is actually just doing exactly what they want to do, and then pretending that everyone should be grateful for it.
Right.
So I think that's why that particular thing happened. But having said that, it definitely wasn't as basic as we both kept to our characters. I mean, by the time we were halfway through the issue for the first script, we were both writing each other's characters and playing. And, it's in a really good collaboration like this, you actually can't quite remember or know who did what, actually, because it was just, we started this project and it was like a bobsled going down the hill. It happened so fast. We were so excited. It was really energetic process.
Well, I was thinking about it. It's a very unique story in that it pulls on very different threads depending where the reader is.
Yep.
And because I'd imagine somebody from the UK has an entirely different experience than I would, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And and hopefully that works both ways. Like, I think that makes it quite interesting. Is that I think because I have Steve covering my back, I think an American would really get the book and understand exactly what's being said. But then I've got his back as somebody living in the UK and understanding that whole culture. So I've really got his back. And so, yeah, it's nice to feel confident that it sort of reads in both territories, which is kind of what we were aiming for.
Yeah, I was cackling about the underwater Atlantic bullock train that connects England and the U.S. being called the Hole, and all the fumes. So that supposedly they're just used as a description as you leave it or exit it. That's definitely a condemnation of U.S. British foreign relations right there for sure.
Excellent, good, yeah, job done.
Yeah. All right, well. Touching on the visuals of the book, the rest of the creative team is Alessandro Oliveri doing the artwork, Francesca Vivaldi on colors, and Fabio Emilia handling the lettering duties. And the artwork itself is very throwback to me. There's a lot of like wide marker work to fill in the details. Like I went back and looked, and it definitely reminded me of like newspaper drawings from the Graphic or the Illustrated London News back in the day.
Right.
Because classically, classic Victorian artwork is like a young maiden in oil, strongly influenced by the Renaissance. This is definitely not that. That's a little bit more of what I expected. So how did you connect with Alessandro and work on laying out the presentation?
So he was a total revelation to both me and Steve, to be honest. I mean, we looked at a few artists when we were going in, and they were very, very different. So there were some that were very realist. There were some that were very, very pretty. There were some that were very, all sorts of different options. And the thing that sort of jumped out about Alessandro was this kind of incredible dynamic energy. I think one of the first things he drew is actually one of the first panels in issue 1, which is that sort of skew panel of a London street with people walking and carriages. And I don't know, I just felt such an energy in that panel. It was just like, wow, that really feels cool. And I feel like I'm walking on that street and I could turn the corner. And so we went with him. But I think what I didn't really understand about what he would bring is the kind of depth of world building, because his design in terms of both fashion and in terms of architecture, I mean, obviously characterization as well. He's got great characterization, but it's a really bold, piece of world building, and that kind of blew my mind, because we weren't relying on that, but it just completely blew our minds when he started doing it, and he goes for it, and you'll see each issue just gets crazier and crazier, and that was really exciting to see. And so he absolutely brought that to the comic, and he's an artist who's really kind of exploding, like he's really coming into his talent, and so it is a very exciting thing to see. I just can't wait for people to see his artwork over this story, because it really goes places.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It's for a story riddled with crime. It's fairly bright, even with the color work. You don't have these deep shadows like you might expect with something that's more of a slasher.
Yeah, that's right. But it's interesting, and I'm interested to see what you think. I mean, it's in the first issue, and it certainly sort of continues, which is we tried to sort of go there in terms of with something like Jack the Ripper. It's I think people reading a book about Jack the Ripper expect a bit of gore and blood and guts, and it's quite funny because this isn't directly related, but I'm going to do what I hate people doing on a podcast, which is bringing something up and not knowing what the bloody name of the person is. But anyway, I was listening to a podcast on BBC recently, and they call him the Elizabethan Tarantino. And there was this playwright. He was kind of the same sort of period as Shakespeare, but he's doing these like incredibly mean-spirited, disgusting kind of crime plays with sort of people being bludgeoned to death on stage and lots of blood and fake blood stuff. And it was just this quite cool idea of that sort of grand guignol, theater of kind of horror. And that was something that we wanted to be in this book. After all, it's a Jack the Ripper story. It's a slasher story. There's going to be some gore. So it's playful, it's fun, it's sexy, I hope. But there's also some gore and a bit of horror. More than a bit of horror in there.
Yeah, I mean, previously with the movie recommendations show, you talked about Steve pulling you back and providing a little bit of grounding away from kind of the minutia of creating this reality. And it feels really fleshed out to me. It doesn't feel like anything's missing. Was there anything that you wish had not gotten cut in terms of like details or something like that?
No. In fact, no. And that's a great question, but really to qualify that, it's almost more like I'd gone down a total rabbit hole of exploration of this period and of the situation, and actually that's only helpful to a certain degree, because at a point you got to let it go and just get into the world and just write the story and just get into your story. So it was more like I could have gone on and on and on and done an endless piece of work, which who knows? I mean, we definitely want to do a sequel, so we'll definitely go there. But what was good about Steve is he was just like, we've got this, let's go, and that was huge fun and really, really valuable.
Yeah, you're both obviously jazzed about it. Are you finding that writing with somebody else is surprising? Is it a lot of fun for you?
I mean, because I've never done it before in comics, and I am somebody who's extremely specific about what I do and really know my own mind, and if I dare use the term for myself, it's like a little bit of an auteur. It's like it's taken me a while even to sort of be able to get into the space, which I'd like to do more of in terms of sort of commercial American comics. I've come from a completely different place, like self-published and then graphic novels, and then getting a bit of a readership in France, and then all the way through that coming to the US. So that's been a slightly different process, but just loving it, and that's Steve's background. He comes from this background of having worked at the big two and being really, really focused, and I really felt I could learn a lot from him, because of that. And it was very cool seeing those two, our two minds come together, and just what fun it was. I mean, I was expecting it to be much more difficult, and sort of for there at least to be some moments where it's like, I totally disagree with you, or I'm really butt heads about something, but we actually never did. We were just always, we always had just too many ideas. It was just like, but what about this? What about that? And it was more, oh God, we can't do all of these, as opposed to like, I don't like your idea. I don't like your idea. Sulk. So no, it was great fun. And I was quite surprised by that, I must say.
I really enjoy the writing process of working with somebody else. My co-host and I, we wrote a story together, and I absolutely loved being able to bounce ideas off of somebody, because I think you create a better world doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I do too, and I think if I really look at it, like if we're talking like comics craft, basically where I've got that from before is probably been from the artist, because that's your partner, and you do have a very intensive relationship, and they're reading your script as it's coming in. You're having these endless conversations. So it's not like I've never had any input before, but this is just so much more specific. And and then to be able to just, I think as a writer, you always have a moment where you're like, oh God, this is a really good idea, but I'm not quite sure how to get to the next part. Whereas if there's two of you, you literally don't even get to think that thought, because by the time you've finished your idea, they're already done the next thing, and then you got the next thing. And you've sort of got this double energy to utilize creative energy. So it just moves very swiftly. I mean, that's if it's working. If it's not working, I'm sure it's the exact opposite, and it just, it would fall apart. But that was my experience of it. So I totally get where you're coming from with your writing partner. It's great if it works.
Yeah, and I think doing it in the writing phase is also critical, because once you get to the artist, then the input of time to be able to produce something and then go back and look at another iteration is.
I mean, again, if it's craft, I cannot believe. I can't believe, because I think I'm somebody who understands comics and whatever, but it is just so bizarre that every time you lay the words onto the artwork, that edit is so crucial. And it's about taking words out inevitably. Sometimes it's adding something here and there, but it's mostly just, it's so weird. Like even now, I still put too many words on the page. And then in that final edit, I find myself just letting go of quite a lot of stuff, just being like, no, it's clear, the art says it, like I can afford to pull back one stage. So it's strange that when, there's always, I don't know, that still goes on, I think, and I think it's quite common for writers, is that you just, at that final point, you just realize you can just do that little edit that really tightens things up, like throwing sandbags off an air balloon, just lets it lift and go.
Yeah, I know that I had a big leap in terms of just understanding structure a little bit better from the writing end of things, because I feel like I'm a good storyteller, but not necessarily the best writer. And in terms of getting one thing more concise, and I think from a visual perspective, from the perspective of somebody as an artist, natively. So I've been really, really lucky to be able to go back and see progressive edits for certain books now, and people send me stuff. So, and it really was like light bulb clicking once you see all the notes and everything. I was like, oh, okay, now I'm getting it down.
Absolutely,
So.
absolutely. And I think it's it's a team effort massively. And we've had incredible editors at Dark Horse, and then we've been working with this studio called Arancia Studio, who've been involved, who are very involved with Steve. And then it's been me and Steve, it's been the artist, it's been the colorist, been the letterer. It's kind of, you really need all of those brains on it. Like, even so, you always feel like you just about get it in and just about get it right. And that's a lot of different heads, but it's just, it's a comic is more complex than you realize. Actually, there's a lot of components, and you stop seeing them after a while. So it's really fantastic having those different sets of eyes on it, and those brains engaged.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Ripperland drops on January 22nd, according to the current release schedule. That's right?
That's right.
All right. Make sure to get your orders in, everybody. I love this book. I have no reason to back my claim here aside from a hunch. So I don't have any additional knowledge. But given the theory that the Ripper was a woman, I'm going to pay super close attention to Holden's escort. That's my take. So
Nice.
John says nothing, so we'll leave that at what is. What else you got cooking that you can talk about at the moment?
That's it at the moment. I've got some stuff which I'm going to be able to talk about very soon, and you will be the first to hear. I'll be right back on here blabbing about it as soon as possible. But also, just to say, the last issue of Summer Shadows, which you've discussed before, is actually out in January as well. So if anybody wants to pick that up, that's great, and that's then going to be collected in April as a trade paperback. So you can grab it then too.
Yeah, I've got that checked. My trade is ordered.
Excellent.
So we're good.
It. One sale right there.
One sale does not make a sequel. I think that's a quote, isn't it?
But a number of one sales make a sequel, so they're all important.
Exactly. Well, where can people find you online? And where are you on Blue Sky yet?
I am on Blue Sky.
I didn't see you there.
No. I think I might have actually friended you yesterday.
Oh no, I'm being called out.
No, you're not being called out, because I haven't been at all active on it, and I'm totally being active on it now. So it's basically John Harris Dunning across the board. So you'll find me on Instagram, and you'll find me on Blue Sky, and you'll find my sort of withered corpse on X. But it just feels like this. It's funny. It just feels like the comics community has just really moved away from that in a very big way.
Yeah,
for obvious reasons. But it doesn't feel like it has the traction that it always had. But it feels like Blue Sky is absolutely getting that traction. And it feels like the community is kind of resettling there. So great.
Yeah, everybody's sort of hit the reset button. I anticipated it happening much sooner than it did, but when it did happen, it's been a true crunch trying to stay on top of not just my personal account. I've sort of let go, but just trying to stay on top of the comic book.
That's why.
account.
But that's why I say. I mean, you're saying, "Oh God, you've been called." It's definitely not being called, because I'm also just finding like it's kind of extraordinary, just the movement that's happening there now, from follows to messages to, it's just suddenly like everybody seems to be there and supportive and going. So it's quite weird. I haven't sort of been in that space for ages where you feel there's so much going on. So that's great. And it's funny. The other thing I just wanted to mention is just, I think because of this upheaval that's happening on social media at the moment, one way or the other, your podcast becomes more important than ever before, and comics journalists become incredibly crucial, as they always have been, but actually more crucial, because people trust you. You have your listenership, and I actually think that as creators, I know that it's never been more important for me to be on your show, because I'm now relying on you in a way that we've always liked each other, and I've always listened to you,
Right.
and I've always been very interested. But it's like I'm just realizing like it's absolutely crucial, and I'm really pleased about that, because you guys deserve that focus and energy. And I think if something good can come with the bad, I think that's something that's one of the elements that will.
Thank you. Yeah, we're trying. We're a group of dedicated people, and everybody covers different things, which I think is also really fantastic. We have now I'm pitching us, but
Good.
we have
Appreciate it.
games
Well,
covers
absolutely.
now.
You
So
should be pitching yourselves. It's important.
yeah, I mean, two great people working on game stuff that are going to PAX, the big
Sorry.
gaming
Yeah.
convention this weekend, even, and doing some coverage on that. So we have a manga representation, a webcomics recommendation. It feels good. I mean, I feel like we're in a good place as a little journalism
Yeah, and it's a
unit.
hub. I mean,
So.
and people rely on it, and this is really, it's very satisfying. This is your passion, and people rely on it, and I think they will more so, actually.
Let's hope so. But the reason we're here is to actually solicit books here and to help you sell stuff. That's why I'm here. That's why I do it. If I wanted people to tell me I'm cool, I'd definitely be doing like a football/soccer podcast or something like that. So, but anyway, it's always a pleasure to have you on, John. Who knows where you will be next time we chat? So that'll be fun to try to track you. I need to put an Apple tag on you or something like that. See where you're
And
going.
listen, it's such a pleasure talking to you always, and I can't wait to do it next time.
All right, man. Well, this is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.